Hello and welcome to GreenPlanet BluePlanet podcast, highlighting artists, teachers, authors, and philanthropreneurs who are committed to planetary purpose, or in other words, holistic visions for planet Earth. My name is Julian, and in today's episode, I'm hosting an interview with Dr. Nick Jensen and Dr. David Wardy. Nick and David are the creators and hosts of the Dr. Dads podcast, which is dedicated to delivering strategies for optimal living. Dr. David Wardy and Dr. Nick Jensen are also both holistic doctors. Their practice is shining a light on the things that every man, dad, husband needs to hear to experience growth daily. Basically, they help you become a better version of yourself every day by burning fat, building muscle, recovering faster, strengthening your gut health, and becoming a healing gangster. And I met these two healing gangsters at the Kundalini 3HO men's camp in Vancouver at the end of July, where we were getting up at 4 a.m. every day, meditating, doing yoga, chanting, and growing as human beings together. And so I'm really excited to welcoming both of them to the show. And with these words, welcome Dr. Nick and Dr. David.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Great to connect again, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a while since I had a podcast with two people. So I'm excited for getting a double load of wisdom and values and medical learnings today.
Yeah, buckle up, buddy. It's going to be coming at you fast.
Well, why don't you get started then? I'd love to hear about this story about the Dr. Dads. Like, it's just such a good name. I feel like anybody who is a dad needs to listen to this podcast.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, it's funny. We'll both jump in here, but it kind of started a year before we actually launched it. You know, David and I, right when we met each other, we're absolutely connected. It's like meeting someone like you, Julian. It's just like you're meeting one of your family members. And I always knew when I first met David, there's something that him and I were going to do together. And I think I reached out to him first. I can't remember how it went. And I was like, David, I think, you and I should do a podcast. And I think maybe I don't know, David was ready to go. He was like, okay, let's do it. Let's get things rolling. And then I sort of just disappeared. I'm not sure what happened, but eventually we came back together, realigned, and then started to launch this thing. And we really was birthed out of the vision that we hold for ourselves. We see ourselves as, strong, sensitive, loving men who both, are dads and we're superheroes to our kids. And we wanted that sort of avatar to be something that we share with the world because, this isn't just for men. It's not just for dads. It's literally for everybody to step into their purpose, step in alignment, step into what's growth for them. And what does that mean to you? And how do you live optimally, not just from health, but mindset, relationship, and then all the strategies that we can share as doctors. So David, can you please fill in the gaps there? Because I know there's more to it than that.
Well, yeah. And like Nick's saying, it was one of these things that it kind of birthed itself out of a friendship that was created. And I think the longer him and me connected, the more it just became this purposeful thing that we knew we needed to do. And the beautiful part about what we get to do every week when we get to record and have guests on the podcast, or me and Nick just get to connect, is number one, I get to learn from Nick because this guy teaches me stuff almost every day. So it's like having a guide that you get to connect with almost every week. But the information that's shared, whether it's with each other, we know it's going to help so many other people just by listening into these conversations, whether it's like I'm saying with these different guest speakers from all different arenas of the health field, or it's just him and me sometimes just getting into the nitty gritty of mindset and life and being dads and fathers and things like that. And there's just so much to offer there. Me and Nick, we pride ourselves in the approach that we take, I think, as professionals to help people get well in many arenas of their health, not just physical health, but mental health, emotional health, things like that. And just through our connection, we see so much really just beauty taking place in helping other people just by giving these little nuggets in each of these podcasts that we have that are helping people experience that growth that we're trying to accomplish. So it's been a blast. It really has.
Yeah, very nice. I love seeing that enthusiasm, especially when it goes about health and beyond the physical kind of part of health. And that's kind of my first follow-up question, because we met at, as I mentioned in the intro, the men's camp in Vancouver just a couple of weeks ago. How important, or what importance is the role of community in people's health? Can you guys demystify that a bit?
I'll let Nick take that one, actually, because I think honestly, I think he'd have a pretty good solid answer for that one.
Yeah, I mean, community is huge. I actually reference my wife a lot. I get a lot of my wisdom from her. She's an amazing woman. And, I can't help but think when you say that, birthing, whether it be friendship, in the case of my wife and I was children, birth takes a village, right? And it's because the birthing experience of, you take that to the level of relationship, that's just that initial intimacy, that's that connection, that's that bond. It's like Dave and I just knowing that we're going to do something together. It's that birthing experience, but really what comes after that, it's community. It's that sustainability experience. The stuff that you teach on GreenPlanet BluePlanet is really about what does the continuum look like in any sort of relationship. And, what's the worst thing that can happen to someone is you put them in isolation. And, this happens obviously in our criminal situations where the worst thing you can do to somebody is actually isolate them. So we're fundamentally wired, and there's things in our brain called mirror neurons where we're literally responding to someone's facial tone, facial muscle contraction. We're so responsive to someone just by looking at them. And again, the worst thing can happen to us is to be in a state of isolation. So we are fundamentally, genetically, chronologically, genealogically linked to a tribal concept. And so we thrive in community. And when we're not there, it's a lifeline that literally degenerates us.
One I would say as practitioners, in addition to what Nick's sharing, you see healthcare taking this very interesting role, at least a lot of functional medicine doctors or holistic doctors, where it's very community-based medicine now, where we're actually sharing a lot of information to these communities, whether they're directly with our practices or with our hometown or just listening to our podcast like this. Nick, he introduced me and immersed me in his community that he'd been a part of, which was the 3HO Kundalini camp that he's been a part of for 5-6 years. And my health has improved just by him exposing me to that and bringing me onto that. So you talk about this community factor in people's health. I think it's really a segue for everyone to latch on to, like he's saying, this tribal type feel to find the growth that they're not getting from maybe the isolation that they're having in their life. And it's one of these things there's a big ripple effect there. I mean, I tell Nick all the time, like, buddy, just meeting you has had massive influence on so many things in my life that's improved my well-being and my health and my happiness and my joy. And I mean, it goes beyond just like, hey, Nick, we're buddies, right? And so you look at something as simple as that, and we're able to do that on a daily basis with our patients and clients, but it's just so much more of a bonus when you're starting to speak out to the world and you're just spreading this information and you're seeing that community and that stuff build in real time.
It's so interesting because I feel like a lot of people that are listening might say, well, I have community or a start of community, but I'm always surrounded by people. I live in a city. There is a community there. But there's something very specific that really happens when you step out of that isolation that might even happen in the middle of big groups of people, the isolation on the inside, right? Like the kind of connection with one's own mind or head brain over the honesty and the vulnerability that, I mean, the way we met with like doing yoga from 4 a.m. to like 6:30 a.m., you basically can't help but start the day completely blown open because you're doing the motions and the notions. So there's no other way than showing up, right? But in regular everyday life, that's not everybody's case. So do you guys have...
I was going to say, jump in if I could.
Please, yeah.
Sort of the paradox of our time, right? Like we're more connected now because of the web and than we've ever been in our entire lives, and there's so much more depression, isolation. There's more this sense of like not being part of a tribe, which is the ultimate paradox, right? And when you speak about being in Kundalini yoga camp, the first thing that popped in my head, like as in a community together, is like we were in the trenches together. Like who wakes up at 3:30 in the morning to prepare for your day with meditation in a grueling yoga class, and then 2 hours of doing some sort of meditative sitting. I mean, it's hard on the body, and there's that relational aspect to knowing that your brothers or sisters or whatever the case may be for you are in it with you, right? And when you think of like any community that you've maybe entered into, those of you who are listening, sometimes you just show up and you feel the energy of the room or the home or whatever it is, and you just know that you feel like you belong there. And, there's not a community necessarily that's going to fit every personality, but definitely there's a personality that can fit into a certain community. And, sometimes it's just feeling into what actually feels like family and community for you.
Beautiful. I like that a lot, because I guess a lot of people are actually struggling with loneliness, and it's something that I think even those of us who are celebrating successes regularly, we are struggling with. And I mean, in this world, truly, that is at this state of our consciousness and evolution, how can we not go through cycles of depression or struggle every now and then? Because the world at large is struggling and pretty depressed, right? So I think it's not about completely being out of that, but watching that on the inside and then surrounding yourself with the support. And so that's kind of my follow-up question for you guys, because I'm just so curious. You called your podcast the Dr. Dads, and you're both fathers. We talked about conscious education a little bit when we met. If you were both to change our education systems at large, and we just talked about community, right? Coming from the topic of community, what would you do? How would you restructure education and education systems, starting with children?
Man, that's a great question. I'll jump in here and obviously we can fill in the gaps. Man, we know something is broken. I don't know if anyone of you has tuned into, there's a great sort of little infomercial that came out with the gentleman who I'm blanking on his name right now, but he was sort of relating a car to the educational system. The educational system, for the most part, hasn't changed a whole lot in like a couple hundred years. If you look at vehicles, like we went from horses, to like somewhat motorized cars with wood tires, and then we're now into the electric realm, and now there's hydrogen cars that are coming out. There's been a steady climb and evolution in how we're doing things. Yet once kids enter into the system, they're taught to sit down, they're taught to behave, and they're taught to listen. The creative model of using, accessing different parts of the hemispheres of their brain. And, we're programming, and someone said this too, that the school systems are built around the military system of such rigid structure. How is someone supposed to identify purpose? How is someone supposed to experience a state of growth when you're always being told how you're supposed to think, how you're supposed to remember, how you're supposed to prepare for tests, And it seems like a silly exercise to go through. And at the same time, it's like, unless you're willing to homeschool or, travel to different parts of the world to help your kids educate in a system that's a lot more conducive to growth, it seems like there's not a whole lot moving. Now, in saying that too, I want to acknowledge all the incredible teachers that are out there that are doing phenomenal work, that have deep, caring hearts, that are maybe more Montessori based, or maybe there's more Emilio or Reggio Emilio, just sort of like, or some of the Rudolf Steiner type of learning, of like helping kids through developmental phases. No doubt there's stuff like that that's out there. But I think what you're referring to and speaking to is like the educational system at large, and looking at that system and just the lack of evolution and growth in it. Clearly, when things are broken, we should be fixing them instead of going, well, how can we sort of micromanage things along the way? And it matters for us because we're both parents, so we think about this stuff all the time.
Well, and I'd like to say, I think one of the biggest problems with our education system right now is the system that we've created for these children to learn in. It's so broken because the foundation of it is that, hey, learn this, then spit it back up on a test. And that's what learning is. And all three of us know that's not what learning is. Real learning is having this ability to problem solve no matter what it is in front of you and have that critical thinking space. So an average day for a kid now is most of these little kids that need to be sleeping more are getting up way too early. They're in school and they're just being bombarded nonstop all day with all this information. And then it's like, okay, now throw it back up on a paper. And then, that means that you're smart because you got a good grade. And then you have these other kids that maybe that type of environment is not conducive for them. They're not getting as good at grades. And then they're seeing those grades as, well, I'm not smart. And so, I'd be completely honest with you. I was one of those kids growing up that I didn't make the best of grades. I wasn't the A student, honor roll student all the time. And there were parts of my childhood where I thought like, wow, I'm not as smart as everybody around me.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until my latter years that I realized like that was all a bunch of BS. Like it had nothing to do with it, you know. And then you start to get older and you find things that you're passionate about and you start to learn a little bit more advanced. But I think kids, if they have an interest or a passion towards something early on, that should be where we push them right away. You know, whether it's they want to be a doctor or they want to be something as simple as a mechanic, or, you know, I heard something one time from somebody and I can't remember, it was a documentary, and they were saying not everybody's going to be, you know, a business exec or, you know, a politician or an engineer. You know, there's some people that may just make guitars or be craftsmen and be carpenters. And so I don't think our education system should be so cookie cutter, and then the kids that can't fall within these barriers, you know, they're considered either dumb or not, they're not going to make it. And you know, the system is just so broken because it's only available to a very small demographic for success, and all these other kids that are outside of that range, they're considered, you know, I guess not worthy to some degree by our education system. And so how many of these kids are falling out through the cracks
Mhm.
because of the system?
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know, if
I love what both of you are saying there. Just to kind of jump back into this conversation, because I feel like, you know, there is uniqueness and passion that really is in everyone, and curiosity and passion, when they're mixed, something really becomes possible, right? And
Mhm.
you know, David, you just mentioned success, but is the definition of success that's common, a commonplace, or economically centric? Is it really the definition that we want to educate children by, especially in like early age? And I think all that is already shifting. And then, and Nick, you mentioned like from like from Rudolf Steiner to other philosophies that I've actually been exposed to in the past, and all of those are great suggestions, but they're also based from the past, right? Like we're in 2019, we're in such like fast changing, highly
Mhm.
technological environments that I'm just always curious to hear what parents and people who, you know, who are so on their journey, like the two of you, what ideas you have to, you know, like add or augment the current systems, or
Mhm.
maybe even just the way parents talk to each other about how the success in quotation marks here of a child looks.
Yeah, so I think if we could, you know, insert a program, it would be to teach people real life skills, right? Teach them about nutrition, teach them about cooking properly, teach them about how to actually take care of yourself when you're not with your parents. Like, how do we establish those routines early? How do we teach them about proper nutrition? Like, guess what? Sugar is not a good thing for you. You know, what Jamie Oliver is even doing with the food revolution is huge because it's just raising awareness. Like, you know, what if we took, you know, you know, finance, nutrition, exercise, spirituality, you know, all these like major components of living an abundant life, and then let the kids decide what that, you know, what that definition of success really is. You know, of course, there must be a role in there somewhere for like biohacking and optimal aging, and you know,
Of course, he would say that.
of course, yeah, and dark performance and everything. I mean, and that helps to birth that curiosity. But yeah, I would love to see something like that. You know, as a parent, you know, it needs, that's where we have to fill in those gaps. You know, I mean, we all of us, I'm assuming things are probably a little different in Europe. I know we don't, Finland, I think, has the highest, you know, grade point average, and they like end school early. There's a whole lot more play time. There's more time for creative play. So I think things are done probably differently in Europe overall than they are in North America. But you know, we turned out okay. But what if, like in those really formative years, like we're from the age 0 to 7, you're deep in theta state. You're deep in that like record state. Like we could be learning like 3-4 languages. We could be like, you know, immersed in an environment that's massively programming, again, success, whatever that is, and the mindset, intention, and spirituality at a young age, and just creating an environment like that. I can't remember this quote exactly, but it goes back to one of the early fathers of Western medicine. He says, "Give me a kid up to the age of 7, I'll show you the man." And it just shows, like, you know, you can really transform someone's life in those early years. And you know, as a doctor, when we see people in their trajectory of health as, you know, as they age in their 30s and 40s and whatnot, we're seeing early and earlier signs of degeneration. And, you know, just think, if we set kids up properly in all those different parameters, um, we would have such a different population.
Well, and you know, one thing I wanted to mention, I was listening to Guru Singh's podcast today, actually, and he was talking about something similar. He was talking about the education system, but one of the things he was explaining was he says, you know, you have kids that sometimes don't question anything, right? And they're just like the herd. They're following along and they do as they're told, and there's no really thinking for themselves. And, you know, I think as parents and administrators at schools and stuff like that, this is the type of kid they want at school. And then you have the ones that are always talking in the back and they're causing trouble and they're asking questions and they're challenging. And I think it was Guru Singh that said, Yogi Bhajan said, "Oh, I love those. Those are my favorites." And they were his favorites because he's like, they don't conform. They're always outside the box. They're thinking, well, why is it that way? And I think we need to have uh, a healthy amount of that in our children's lives from birth, like Nick's saying, from 0 to 7. Of we don't conform to how it is because this doesn't necessarily mean that it's the way it's supposed to be.
Hmm.
And like you're saying, like what is success? I think this conformity that we're creating for our kids, and it's like this system of, well, this is success. This is what it looks like. This is what it's supposed to be. So then these kids grow up brainwashed thinking, well, that's what I have to do because that's what I'm supposed to do. And who said that?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, me and Nick, we're very outside the box doctors. And if we went back to school, right? If you and me were in high school, we would literally be the weird ones because we wouldn't be the ones that were conforming to everything else. We'd always be the ones that were thinking outside the box and wanting to do all this random stuff, and everyone would probably be looking at us funny. But now we're business professionals and we thrive off of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're completely against the grain. We're like the rebels in healthcare right now with the way we
The
approach
healing
everything.
gangsters. Let's
Yeah.
jump in right there because I like the transition that's like emerging, you know,
Mhm.
because the way I understand healing gangster, which it does make me smile, but the way I understand it is like you have agency over your own health. So take that agency, claim that responsibility for your own health, right? So the doctor is not just an authority. And I'd love to hear the two of you on a topic that, I mean, Dr. Nick, you shared about that largely at Men's Camp as well. For the three of us, it might be something we're already pretty familiar with, but you talked about like programming the subconscious and theta brainwave states, and then how we're basically just operating from a subconscious mind in our later life, and how people basically sabotage their health in the environments and the circumstances they grow up in, and later on are just really putting band-aids on it. And so the state of health in general and what it takes to be like a healing rebel, like what's coming up for you, the two of you, because that's your everyday life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one of the things that we talked about, the core sort of word, I think, was disruption, right? Because it's kind of like the kids at the back of the room. They're disrupting everything. Like we need to find a way to subdue them. And yeah, disruption is really everything that we teach because, you know, we all have these, we talk about worldview a lot on our podcast as well, as we all come in with a certain lens of how we're seeing the world. And you know, take your fish oils, take your probiotics, you know, milk is bad, red meat's bad, this, like, whatever the construct is. And I'm not giving dietary advice at this moment right now. I'm just saying, like, we all have like an opinion on things. And yeah, when you turn into a healing gangster, you start to just, who are you? You're creating an authenticity about who you are, and you're a unique individual. You know, gangster would be someone who goes against the grain, someone who, again, rebellious or what have you. And when I look back at my life, I never liked authority. I really can't stand, and I get really triggered by injustice. And when things are being positioned upon us that we have to think, you know, act a certain way. And that brings in the uniqueness of each individual, especially when it comes to someone's healing journey. You have to be disrupting the brainwave patterning, the thought forms, your worldview. You have to disrupt everything. You know, the worst or the least conscious individual is the one who's not willing to question their own belief system, the one who's not willing to say, to actually listen.
That's a big one, man. That's a big one right there.
Like, you know, how willing are you to learn? Like, are you willing to open your ears and actually be open-minded? Like that's a sign of like a conscious individual in my mind, is how high is your willingness to learn? And, you know, some of the best doctors, we get to, I mean, so grateful that we get to meet some just phenomenal world changers. And these are some of the most humble people you could ever meet. They know so much. They've had so much accolades for the things that they've done, and they're some of the most curious people you can imagine, and I think of that, just from different stories of people like Warren Buffett or people that are just reached the highest of where they could go, and they're probably the most curious people on this planet, and there's a reason for that, and they never stop learning, never stop growing, always looking deeper.
Well said, man. I got nothing. That was beautiful.
Sounds to me that when you have agency over your own health and you're like committed to being a lifelong learner, that in another way to kind of like butcher what you said there or paraphrase it is like you can change your state of health if you're actually curious enough to do so.
Totally.
Well, the why's got to be there, but I think Nick would second me when I say this. A lot of the healing that takes place for us to just get the door open and get people moving in the right direction is we have to help them unlearn and question their beliefs, like he's saying. It has to start there because so many people, that's why they're sick. They've been upside down their whole life, and then you find out it's paradigm. It's oh, well, I thought this was the truth, and then when they start learning, like, holy cow, all these things I thought were the reality of how I was supposed to do it, I've been doing the complete opposite of what I'm supposed to be doing. And so that's where that whole gangster, right, comes into, is like, we're the ones that are cool with saying, hey, do it, take a 180, completely 180 degree approach. You need to do it this way, and we're okay with it.
Yeah, and I think we learned some of that. I'm not sure if you did too, David, but from Tim Ferriss, he talks about that stuff all the time. It's like, look and see what everyone else is doing, and then do the exact opposite and test it for yourself and see if there's truth there for you. Dave Asprey talks about that even with the fat. There's a whole disruption on nutritional situation or conversation around is fat good, is fat bad. And again, it's another 180 degree solution.
Yeah, very curious. I mean, those two are definitely disruptors in the space that they're sitting in, Dave Asprey and Tim Ferriss. I have a follow-up question that just kind of popped into my head, and I'm just curious. Have you guys explored the healing therapies or healing properties of binaural beats? And what could you say about that?
I'm actually a huge fan. That's something I've dipped into in the last year, and I started playing with it just after you hear about it in the biohacking arena and you start wanting to play with these things a little bit. And so I was using it really for stress reduction, to help with sleep if I started to see my sleep cycle getting thrown off. And I think it's amazing. I've seen some huge impact on sleep. When I need to start getting better sleep, improved sleep, I'll literally listen for, I probably only last 12 minutes and then I pass out, but I'll throw in my headphones before bed, throw in some binaural beats, put some underlying tracks. And man, I have a very deep background in energy medicine, which is all frequency based. So it makes complete sense to me. And I'm a big advocate for sound therapy and using things like binaural beats and some of these other things to help with healing and really at the foundation of what we are as human beings. I mean, when you're doing that type of therapy, people can say brain, they can say all these things, but me and Nick, we talk about the connective tissue matrix. You're hitting a layer of the body that really, I mean, if you're not using a tool like that, you don't really have access to medicine like that without using something like that.
Mm-hmm. I was kind of laughing just because there's sort of this theme that keeps showing up in our podcast on sound as medicine. And we've had 3 different experts. We're having actually Law from Men's Camp teach us on drumming and drumming for health in a few weeks. And I mean, the more we learn about it, even just, doing mantra, like the stuff that we did at Men's Camp. I mean, there's so much power and vibrational energy and obviously everything's frequency. And I'm also kind of laughing because I remember back to one of the many moments on my journey where my mind was absolutely blown. And it was a naturopathic school. I think I took a couple days off because I wasn't feeling well. And someone told me to watch this movie called What the Bleep. And I remember watching the movie.
I love that one.
Oh my God. Like I watched the film and there was this elation inside of me. I was like, I knew it. I knew that there was more to health and the body and the mind than everything we've been told. It's like, I knew it. We weren't learning this stuff. And like, we don't learn this stuff in naturopathic medicine. I don't know if you did in chiropractic medicine. Like, we didn't learn this stuff. And when I watched that movie, I was so blown away. I watched it again and watched it again, and I was searching everywhere for more information on this stuff. And there just wasn't a lot of stuff available at that time. And then I stumbled across something called Holosync, started listening to that and getting into these altered states of consciousness with, dabbled in some things like astral travel and all this. I was just blown away by this world of vibrational medicine and energy and frequency. And then to come on this other side and understand the physiology and biochemistry and neurochemistry and all that stuff, and then to see more technology come out that's supporting this, and now there's science that backs this up, it gets me really excited for the future. And to think that we're moving into a time where technology and like sound healing or whatever, the realm is coming out so quick. Like when we talk about like biohacking and some of the cool things that are in this world, there's always this new toy, and I'm like a squirrel. I see the squirrel, I just look for it, and I'm constantly going like, wow, there's stuff that can do that. There's stuff that can do that. It's so powerful. And when we understand some of that basic physiology, like you're saying, like extracellular matrix, all these little microtubules and fascia that make up the interconnectivity between our cells, is really like the channels for how vibration shuttles through our entire body. It's absolutely fascinating. And it just shows how intricate and how connected everything is, and how your movement matters, and how you talk about yourself matters, and the things you listen to, and your sleep, and it just bridges everything.
Yeah, this is super fascinating. What comes to mind when you guys speak about healing properties of sound is the environments we've created and we live in. Right. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious if an early riser, which I think all three of us have at least met in that ecosystem of rising early. But if you're an early riser in a city and you get out there, maybe you run through a park or whatever, and it's sometime between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. and you literally hear the city wake up. It's like from silence and nature, I would call it harmony. There's the sirens and the jackhammers and the cranes and construction sites and the cars. I mean, the cacophony of sound that comes alive in a city on an everyday basis it's actually kind of mind-blowing how crazy the soundscape is in the places a lot of people live in. And so I'm just curious to hear your point of view, like, the healing properties of sound. Would that mean maybe in a future iteration of the way we build, we take that into account and like create resonance chambers or resonance fields or resonance places in cities? Can you see that?
Yeah, just a personal experience. I mean, I just before we got on the podcast, I had to take a call because it was my lawyer discussing some things that we need to sign for taking ownership of our new house. And where we lived before was so loud. David stayed there. We were right in living in a busy, really busy street, tons of traffic, 2 lanes on either side, and it was nonstop. Our nervous systems in the summertime, because you had to have the windows open a little bit more, just rocked. You just feel that like all day long. You can't think of like just being this racing mindset. It's kind of like people turning the news on and just you're in a crappy mood after and you forgot why. It's just constantly playing in the background. And so we have the opportunity to move to another part of Vancouver that's just beautiful. It's 2 blocks from the ocean. It's super quiet. It's not busy at all. Like we're gonna be in a nice piece of nature, and what that does, just even thinking about it, just makes my nervous system so happy and elated, because it's that fight or flight state, right? We can't heal when we're constantly in sympathetic overdrive, and it's all the stimulus. We can talk about EMFs and 5G that's coming down the pipeline, and then you can get on a rabbit hole in that stuff, and then you can also think, well, you know what? There's driverless cars that are coming. We're moving into an electric paradigm. There's the cars gonna be a lot more quiet. Maybe there's gonna be a little more control on speed limits, and maybe there'll be better access for public transport. So, with all the disruption that is happening, it's affecting us. My hope is that yes, we do all those things. We have better sound barriers. We've got better public transport. We quieten the things. there's so much research now, and just even like from Japan, and looking at tree bathing and the power that being in nature has on these little things called cytokines in your body that regulate inflammation. You're literally, when you spend time in nature and you get out of the noise of the city, your body actually releases healing chemicals. Like, big surprise. There's study after study showing that getting out in nature is absolutely conducive to a healthier body, mind, and spirit, all of it.
So, David, I'm pretty sure you have something else to say on that, but I just want to throw the term epigenetics into the room as well, because, I mean, probably no one better to talk about it and explain it a bit more than the two of you right now, right here. But aren't we creating epigenetic environments that are triggering the wrong neurochemistry and like connections within us, like in those environments? And isn't, like what you just said, Dr. Nick, isn't it like so obvious? If that's what the forest does to us, then like we got to provide those environments for humans around us.
Well, and I would say, these epigenetic stressors, right? We're talking about something as simple as sound. Nick talked a little bit about like electric cars, and so you're looking at, we have electromagnetic pollution, we have electrosmog from 5G and 3G and Wi-Fi, and everything is electronic now, right? And that's just that. And then you talk about biochemical stressors. And so one of the things I love that Nick actually talks a lot about, he talks about the terrain that we're creating in our bodies on a daily basis. And if you're in a constant mode, like he's saying, of these bombardments of sound and toxicity in the food around you, and the water and the air, and even the people of the community you're in, maybe, and the type of friends you surround yourself with, are they bringing positivity or are they negative all the time? So you're getting overloaded 24/7. You're in sympathetic overload. Your nervous system's just tapped out. So when are you ever hitting that pressure release valve to get your body back into a parasympathetic mode, which is where we're supposed to live the majority of the time? Our body is supposed to just be in and out of fight or flight in little bursts, but we're supposed to be living in parasympathetic mode and keeping that tone to stay healthy. So, you said something earlier, Julian. You said, are we going to have these like sound chambers? And I hope it never gets to the point where in cities they're having to build these like quiet escape chambers for us to escape the insanity. Like right now you see people post all the time how important it is to get outdoors. And the reason is for that, it's just to unplug. It's to get out of that electrosmog, all this electromagnetic radiation. It's to get away from the cell phones and the computers and the sound and just tune out, because as human beings, we're connected to Mother Earth, and that's one thing that she provides us that's always there, but we have to make sure that there's an environment that's conducive for our health that way. Nick's moving from the city out, to more of a suburb area where it's quieter. One of the things I love about where I live is we picked a house that was on the corner of a development. I have nobody behind us. We have nobody to the side of us. I have a view of the beautiful Franklin Mountains behind me. And so when I get to go home, I'm escaping the hustle and bustle of my daily life and all the hecticness, right, of everything and all these epigenetic stressors. And when I go home, there's this tranquil stillness in my household. Or if I step outside of my house, I can go walk up the mountain and I get that parasympathetic drive going immediately. That's my escape. But how many people have that on a daily basis? Because some people, they're just living in it and it never stops.
Yeah, I mean, you just said, hopefully we never have to build those spaces in cities. But at the same time, I'll just ask you back, don't you think we have that pollution to the max already right now? Like, aren't we already at the breaking point?
I think we are at the breaking point, but I'm hoping that it never gets to where they have to do that. I hope we start moving in the other direction.
Yeah.
Because
those are the new stories to tell, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's apparently, I just had a patient earlier today tell me that there's this great Netflix documentary talking about the Canary Islands. I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, but apparently they were like 80% or 100% all fossil fuels. And the Canary Islands, the landscape is it's a coastal place, of course. So they're actually desalinating the water. They're pumping it up the mountain to, I'm not sure if it's an old volcano. Then they're basically repiping the water that comes back down the mountain. They're using hydroelectric power from that pumping down the mountain, and they're using that for clean water. And it's like all these like things. We have all the answers around us right now, and we're still barreling pipelines through nature. It's crazy. Like, it's just absolute insanity that the technology is there. It's just not being implemented. You know, like, I can't remember when it was the first electric car came out, but I mean, we should have been way past the point.
It's a while ago, yeah.
I mean, it's so silly. I mean, things move so fast in computers, technology. I mean, I still remember my dad had the big brick phone, right? And, you know, look where we've come with these smart computers sitting in our pockets. Like, but we're like snail's pace for these other things. And obviously it's driven by the green energy, the dollars, right? So,
right. I mean, the forces and the reasons of why things are moving the way they are, that's a whole other conversation. And I think it's somewhat obvious once somebody digs into the research and the leaks and everything that's available out there. But it is very curious to see that a lot of the progress that we've all been hoping for, including like the environmental responsibility we have as humans, because we are a powerful species that is able to take control of the planet and is able to change the climate and the environment, right? So that movement, I feel there's a strong desire in people that movement would go faster. But then also, I think it requires all and every single one of us who is awake to that notion to step up and continue to keep up, so that we can actually step into that kind of a shift. Like, if I think of the storytellers, and that includes myself, like, we're coming really late into that game. Like, those stories, I mean, could have, doesn't help in any way or sense, but could have been told 30 years ago, so that now they are becoming the new normals. And so we have to fight pretty hard to build new normals amidst, like, you know, crazy things happening, like the Amazon and Siberia burning that down for more cattle and soy. And I mean, the United States investing into that, and so on. We know that this is the current reality, so we can acknowledge it without getting lost in it, I guess. You know, I want to ask a personal question to each of you, and it's a segue, I think, that makes sense, because when we talk about the environment and we talk about all the things that are going on still on the like rather dramatic side of how humanity is, you know, yeah, quite an abusive species in some ways. I'd love to know from both of you, what is required for you to experience trust, interpersonally or individually or in a group?
I can start here, because it's kind of made me think on a bunch of different tangents, and I want to try to keep it focused as much as possible. You know, I'm a gullible guy. Someone tells me something, I want to look for the positivity in it. I want to find the truth in it as quickly as possible. And my wife's the exact opposite. She's got more of that negative mindset. She's like, she'll smell the bullshit, the BS. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that in this podcast, but she'll smell it right away. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like I think it's a curse and a gift, because I'm always looking for how things, the solution, like, could that be true? And so I think there's a beauty in that. And then the challenge, though, is that I've realized about myself, when I'm that way, I lose proper discernment for what's truth for me. And so I'm so quick to try to help someone else and boost them up and be on board, that I don't do a self check-in to see if it's truth for me in this moment. It may be truth for me at some point in time. It may be truth in the past, but I've learned that my trust needs to come from a deeper sense of who I am, and not just jump in and say yes to everything that comes my way. And so in relationship, and it's funny because after men's camp, actually, that was one of my words. Every year, my wife and I talk about our word of the year. And I went into men's camp with my words of potency and the things I do, say, act, and be, and devotion. And I didn't really capture devotion. Maybe a story for another time. I had a really challenging event that showed up after a retreat that we led. And I was in disbelief and out of my purpose a little bit for the last few months until after men's camp. And after men's camp, both David and I were like laughing and crying. And at one point in one of the exercises we did, and what came out of that was allowing me to move into a place of trust. There's a purpose for me on this planet, and part of that purpose revolves around deeply trusting myself and listening. Because I think trust is not possible without that authentic listening within. So that's it for me. I've moved from gullibility to actually honoring truth for me, and that comes from actually listening to myself first before I jump in. I don't know if that's kind of the direction you were looking for, but that's
beautiful, brother. Thanks for sharing that. This is very insightful.
Man, that's a tough question. I'm listening to a lot of things that Nick's saying, and I agree with him in many ways. I also will see the best in most people, and I would call myself a little gullible, and I think that's why we're married, right, Nick? We have our wives who can smell that BS a mile away. And they're
the same, isn't she?
Oh yeah, man. They're always there to step in when it needs to happen. And then after they say it, you kind of look at them and you're like, oh my God, why didn't I see that? What you're telling me right now?
Yeah.
But amazing. The first thing that came to mind for me is I have this saying I always say, and this is just from life experiences where like I had trust in people that they were doing good things either for me or their intentions were strong, and then it backfired. But it's one of those things where like you give somebody enough time, and I think it was my mom that told me growing this up, and they'll kind of hang themselves with their words if you spend enough time with them. And that's just kind of been how it's been with me with some of these negative experiences I've had with trust. But I think I would second with Nick of saying the more I've connected with trusting myself of who I am and what I'm all about, I think it's enabled me to find making better decisions to trust other individuals. And that would actually come from the connection I find with people. Like, for example, someone like Nick and even you, Julian, the amount of connection I'm able to have sometimes with people just within a few moments of hanging out with them, sometimes I dial in with that person. And a lot of times that's enough for me to give that person trust. But then I'm saying, and then time's the other factor. You spend enough time with that person. Is that connection congruent the whole time, or is it losing it? And if you lose that congruency with that connection with that person, then sometimes I feel like, well, maybe the trust isn't there like I thought it was at the beginning. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but
I feel it does. And on the contrary, though, with what you just said, if that person over time proves that they're trustworthy, I feel like in my experience, then trust goes exponentially through the roof.
Oh, it deepens, right?
Yeah, it deepens so much, because if I can go through adversity or hardship or a form of struggle with someone, and I'm like, oh wow, but you were really there, or I could really count on you being you, right? For me, this is a big one with trust is, can I trust you to be you, or are you changing who you are every 5 minutes? Not that that's a bad thing. I think we all change. Changes is obviously part of life, but integrity has to do with it for me as well. I love this question, because sorry, go ahead.
Well, you hit it on the head, man. I like the way you said that. You said, like, are you going to be that same person? Am I going to feel that same connection with you that I felt the first 2 or 3 times? Or am I getting a different person every time, right? Yeah. And that just throws those red flags out. And so, yeah, that was a good way of describing what I was trying to say earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I could add one thing, I mean, we can also trust people to be jackasses too, right? Like you could just, again, they can own it, and I think,
yeah,
I don't know if you guys remember this part of the lecture when Guru Singh was talking about this guy that he worked with. It was complete, just jackass, to use the word again. And he was like, clearly there was something wrong with him. And he, Guru Singh, I think, was getting him to do something, and he grabbed a hammer and started smashing like windows, right? And there have been a bunch of series of events that were leading, up to this moment. He's like, that's it, I've had enough. I'm taking you to Yogi Bhajan, and he's going to sort you out. And then as soon as he stepped in the presence of Yogi Bhajan, for those of you who don't know, that's the main yogi who brought Kundalini Yoga to the West, and it's called Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan. Anyways, he brought him to see him, and Guru Singh was expecting he's going to get an ass whooping, and he's going to lecture him and tell him he better shape up or he's out of here. And because of the presence that Yogi Bhajan was in, he basically saw into that person the potential, the future version of that man's self, of the potential of who that person is, that big version of that person. And because he is so solid in who he was able to invoke that out of this individual, and his entire personality shifted. He was a different person in the presence of a master. And I think that message right there is what we can all strive towards. We can all take ownership over. And it goes back to both everything that we were validating. When we own who we are, like to the core, people have to show up, because it goes back to vibration, the sound thing. We resonate. The heart coherence of who we are magnifies out so much further than what our, the brain frequency does. And it literally lifts people up around you. So if you want to want more trusting relationships, you got to build that within yourself, man. And that's the power of really owning who you are and operating from that infinite identity and expressing that through yourself, right?
Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful, man. I have two more questions, and one I'll split between the two of you. I want to hear answers from both of you, so on both of those questions. But the first one is, maybe just one lesson that you wish you knew when you were,
just
20
one?
years old. Just one lesson that you know now, though, that you're embodying, that life has taught you. One experience where, like, oh man, I wish I could just like go back in time, tell that to my younger self, because it would have just changed. I mean, not that the adversity we go through is bad, right? Because it helps us too. But one lesson.
Yeah,
tap into.
I'll jump in. And I don't mean to steal Matthew McConaughey's thunder. I don't know if you saw one of his speeches where he says, "Who's your hero? It's me 10 years from now." If I could have seen myself as my own hero when I was 3 years old, 5 years old, if I could really identify as like who I'm becoming, man, that would have been a huge gift. Because I was the type of individual who always had to look perfect, act perfect, do everything 100% correctly. The type A, it had to always be perfect, and I couldn't for the life of me have anyone not see that within. Like, just making this facade of this is who I'm supposed to be, because that's going to make other people happy around me. And complete lack of identity. And so what is that essentially? If I could have learned that I am the hero that I'm waiting for in my life, that would have been the most powerful message. And then I would have obviously wanted to learn how to access that type of information and be able to draw on it more regularly. But yeah, that's it for me, for sure.
I think for me, it would be patience. I think that sounds funny, but I even look at my son as we're raising him. He's 5.5, and there's a theme there that I think it would speak to everybody, as far as we underestimate, I think, how long sometimes can take to grow in certain areas of our life, whether it be your health or relationships with loved ones, or getting, sharpening your skills, your education. It doesn't matter what it is, right? But we always want to get there quick. We want to get from A to B right away. And the reality is that doesn't happen. And it takes time. It takes going through that resistance. It takes experiencing the growth, that everybody a lot of times shies away from, but we know we need to move towards that to grow as human beings, because we're built for that, right? This evolution. But just being patient with it and respecting the process, that as long as you're moving through it and you have that momentum, that to just trust that you're going to make it where you need to get, and trust that, like Guru Singh says, what is has always been, and you just have to just keep moving and allow things to play out the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, I love that. I would have told myself that too.
Could you tell that to my 20-year-old self as well?
Well, that's such a powerful message, because we all associate time in such a different way. And when it's like, even just how we identify ourselves, like what's actually aging us is actually just the memory of where we've been, right? We're new bodies physically every 10 years or something like that. Like physically every cell is turned over. The only thing that's continuous in this is just the memory of what was. So, just imagine if we would become more patient. What if we changed our relationship to time? It may be part of unlocking the keys to longevity, just with that alone, with that understanding of time is a wave. All things are happening now, and that's a beautiful way of putting it, David.
That's a beautiful thought. It's just such a great thought. It just got me tripping out on this awareness, like every morning when you wake up, that space that you wake up in, or for like a few seconds, a few minutes, sometimes you're like still in the dream world, and then you're kind of bringing that in, and that's more real than anything. And then at some point, your memory of who you thought you were awakens, and all the thoughts and worries and ideas and need to get this done today. Like no matter what time it is, if it's 6 a.m. or 10 a.m., you get up and that stuff comes in the first few minutes, and you're like, wow, do I really need to remember this? Or is this just a really poorly practiced function of how most of people in society are operating right now? Like it's happening for me, right? I do wake up with that. And sometimes I just wish I could just put the memory on pause and realize, okay, if I really need to, I can look at that later. But I want to experience this day as fresh. I want to experience this day without being taken already into opinions and right, wrong, yes, no, left, right,
I love that. Yeah. Get rid of the default mode, right? That we all wake up with.
Well, that's disruption, right? That's everything that you're teaching people, Julian. That's everything that we're teaching. It's like, what if you just did something a little bit differently, right? And be okay with that being there. But despite that being there, this is what we call the daily practice, the sadhana. It's just breaking routine. It's just changing how you wake up and greet the day. That's a message for all of us. You're not the only one. I wake up thinking of that stuff too. And then
lots of work to do.
Yeah, the new default mode, right? It's like create a new default mode.
Alrighty, I have one last question then, and this is the question that you really sent me onto this journey, or this quest on starting this podcast over 2 years ago now. And it has to do with this Native American or indigenous people's notion of 7 generations. So if we as a humanity at large now had integrated this notion of 7 generations are roughly like 210 years, I believe. And we had an actual vision for what Earth could look like, feel like, be like in 200 years from now. Just so we can actually imagine it, and we can actually hold ourselves maybe even accountable to that notion for the 7 generations. In both of your own words, like what would that world feel like, look like? Is there anything that drops in, any vision or any values or anything that you'd love to mention?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is having this very reestablishing a deep connection with Mother Earth. Because we are her, she is us. We are completely connected to this planet. And right now with where we're at, we are so far from that. And I think technology is pulling us further and further away. So how can we integrate this amazing technology we have at our disposal, but still keep that connection with her on a daily basis, and understand that that's what keeps us going. You talk about moving forward as a human race. That's what we need to get back to so that we can continue to be a human race, because otherwise we're not going to be around very much longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can I say ditto?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's essentially it, right? It's funny, when you said that, I had a conversation the other morning with my boys, and they said something. It's a little different, but they're like, "Dada, what would you do if you had $1 million?" And then I started going through it, and he said, and then he had another question, "Dada, what would you do if you had $1 billion?" And then I told him, and it just kind of got more exciting and bigger, and it was helping more people. And it's like, Dada, what if you had $1 zillion? It just kept increasing. It was so funny. But what does a future look like? It looks like that. It looks like creativity and opportunity and just thinking outside the box and being playful and, loving your family and getting a chance to spend time with them. And not like in the 9 to 5, get to work, got to get this done, got to do that. Play out a game that's not serving anybody, and it's clearly not serving the planet. Let's be honest. So if I could picture a world 200 years from now, it's like I would get to spend most of my days, moments playing, being with my kids, learning, growing food, being in community, celebrating, sharing. And it would probably look like a lot less traffic. It would look like a lot less drama, a lot more meditation, and just really being in a place of service where everyone was on the same page. And yes, we all had our own unique perspectives, but we were all working to something that was right. I mean, it reminds me of something. I wish I could remember who said this, but it was something like, in relationship, it's not about who is right, it's about what is right. And if we can just get into what is right, and as far as a relationship goes with ourselves, with our planet, with our community, with the microbes that exist in our bodies or on our bodies, I mean, man, like that's it right there. Like, let's get away from who's wrong, right, wrong, good, bad, that whole dogma, and let's just get into what is right. And that's congruency, that's alignment, that's purpose, that's love, that's everything. So yeah, that's a fantastic question. Love it.
Thank you both for answering it. It feels and sounds like a world that works for everyone. And that's really my truest hope deep down there. Thank you for spending this hour with me. Is there any last ideas you would like to share, or anything you want to make sure you point people towards? Obviously, we'll post the Dr. Des podcast in here as well, so people can follow you and listen to your show as well.
Hit us up on Facebook or Instagram. Me and Nick are constantly adding posts there. Lots of good stuff. Even if you don't have time to listen to the podcast, we post a lot of good nuggets throughout the year on there. So just check us out on social media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that we like to gift to the world is to disrupt the food movement. So one of our passions in sharing with people is something that doesn't cost you anything, and it only gives back to you, and that's the power of fasting. So if you're inclined towards that, again, dive into the information that we share. Both David and I both also run online fasting programs to teach people how to do this. If we're going to move into a sustainable future, this is a tool set that you absolutely need. And it's that simple. And if you're not learning this, you need to start learning it. And I remember when I first started doing some of the fasting back in the day, I was scared to tell my wife about it. She thought I was crazy. The whole staff was like, this guy's got too much energy. What's going on with him? He needs to eat. His blood sugar's all over the place. and now, just with all the movement, the research, what comes out of this, I mean, it's sometimes the simplest thing that you can do, and it can have the biggest impact in your life. So I encourage everyone who's listening, start learning about it. It doesn't have to be through us, but if you're feeling inclined, look it up. It's a powerful tool.
Indeed, fasting is a whole other conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Glad you mentioned it. I might have to have you guys back to just talk about fasting only.
That'd be a blast. Yeah, that'd be a blast.
Be honored, man. It's been a fun conversation with you today, Julian.
Thank you.